Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this presentation, Competitive Compliance. I'm Mike Richmond, your host for Exemplar Global's online expo, focused on the current state of the conformity assessment industry. This session today is presented by James Thompson. James is the founder and CEO of Concentric Global. Jim is also an author, professor, trainer, and thought leader with deep experience in the worlds of quality management, continuous improvement, and process engineering. In this presentation, Jim is going to look at how organizations and individuals can get the most value out of the conformity assessment process. And I'll pop in once or twice because Jim and I are buddies and ask him some questions as we roll along with the presentation. So with that, Jim, take it away.
You also sound like my agent all of a sudden. It's like, show me the money. You make me sound, maybe it's imposter syndrome, but I appreciate the warm welcome, Mike.
Of course.
And by the way, it was nice after all these years to finally meet you at the World Expo on Quality and Improvement a couple of weeks ago down in Florida.
Yeah,
Uh, you are a real human and not AI, and that's pretty sweet.
I am. That's true.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to try to change your mind on a couple of things. And really, as Mike said, competitive compliance is a phrase here in with my team and with our customers, and kind of a more progressive approach that we've been using lately. So really shifting the compliance paradigm, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about. Um, I've been on this journey for a really long time. I mean, one day you wake up and you realize 31 years ago you started in this industry. Mike, I started in 1995. I was a student at Purdue, and I was lucky enough to snag an internship during the summer with a manufacturing facility, and so that's when I first kind of got uh, dipped into the pool of ISO and that sort of thing. And I also became a student ASQ member in '95. So it's been really interesting to transition from quality and compliance back then to kind of the way that I see it now, which is a lot different. The hardest part is really changing the way that other professionals, business leaders, those that have a responsibility for managing compliance obligations, changing their mindset. So hopefully I'll be able to provide just a couple nuggets here that will get you to at least consider looking at compliance in a different way. So most organizations, leaders, folks that have to deal with compliance approach compliance like a cost or a compliance tax. There's um, it, very few people might chalk all this stuff up on a leadership level to something that they love doing and is easy and simple, and it just seems to be a cost center. It's a burden. It's typically the compliance management typically is or I don't want to say typically, but more often than I would like to see, uh, it's kind of a satellite that circles the globe of the organization, and a couple times a year it pops up, and we get audited and that sort of thing, and that's not only an extreme underutilization of discipline, but it's also it's very difficult, you know, for us professionals that are responsible for, kind of rolling out and complying with this framework like ISO standards and different things. But a lot of times you're in a position where you have the responsibility but not the authority. And at the ASQ conference a couple of weeks ago, I mean, there was a lot of people there, 1,000+ people. Um, and it several times a day, it was like more of a kind of a help group or a group therapy session, because, everyone seemed to have some sort of war story about this compliance stuff and management system and auditing and all of that being much harder than it should be. So we kind of refer to that as the compliance tax type approach. But just looking here, you've probably seen this image, Mike. You know what this is called? Yeah, have you seen it
I see a
before?
bunny.
Okay, you see a bunny. All
No,
right.
I see a duck.
Yeah, it's a rabbit or a duck. And American psychologist Joseph Jastrow uh, experimented a bit with perception, and one of the things that he found is in doing trials of what do people see. Not only were there two objects, but what's so fascinating about it is, groups of children, let's say, were given this image, and the same child, if they looked at the image around Easter Sunday, they would see a bunny. But if they saw this image in a Sunday in October, they would see a duck. So similar to the glass half full or empty or whatever, a lot of this is about perception. And so I hope to change your perception and give you some tools, not only to be a change agent yourself first, you got to start with yourself, but then maybe helping others within your organization or even your customers see really the same thing differently. So, what is this term called competitive compliance? So, ultimately, this is elevating compliance to a strategic advantage. You've heard of competitive advantage before, and that's really what we're digging at here is being able to use the framework and my word of 2026, which is discipline. Use these aspects of your business, the activities, the things that you're paying for, the things that you're investing in as an organization, as a strategic advantage instead of a burden. So competitive advantage really is a philosophy that transforms management systems from mere requirements obligations into dynamic tools for performance enhancement, market differentiation, and sustainable enterprise value creation. Now, why is that more important today than ever? Well, one of the things that we're seeing is, especially if you're in some of the more complex industries like medical device, aerospace, automotive, life sciences, those areas where you have to have very serious controls in place. uh, the typically the top of the mountain there is some sort of OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, that your component gets woven into over time and throughout the supply chain. It seems like it's a never ending pile of you have to comply with this standard, and then 3 years later, oh, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this. I don't know if you saw the Jim Carrey version of like the Grinch Who Stole Christmas when he's
Right.
like the judge or the 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 baking competition. They just keep shoving pies and cakes and things into his mouth, and that's what it can feel like sometimes in the land of compliance. And so now you're not in charge of deploying kind of the rails of compliance, but now you have environmental in addition to quality and information security, and now you got these AI. So if you're taking the approach that compliance is just a hassle, and then you're multiplying that hassle by several different standards, I mean, you're magnifying the headache, the cost, the burden, and kind of the compliance tax within your organization. So let's think about this just for a second in a little bit different way. So traditional versus competitive. So understanding the key differences. So the traditional compliance focuses on kind of checking the box and checkbox driven audits, often treated as a reactive cost center, hindering potential value creation and fostering a culture of minimal engagement and oversight. It's in parallel to what the business priorities actually are, where competitive compliance transforms the management system into proactive engines for continuous improvement enabling organizations to leverage compliance as a strategic advantage and enhance performance and enterprise value. So,
Hey,
you know,
Jim,
yeah.
how does that relate to the idea of cost of quality, which I actually had some conversations about that at
Mhm.
ASQ's World Conference last week or 2 weeks ago too. I think many times cost of quality is a little bit of a misnomer because it doesn't mean how much does it cost to have quality. It means what's the cost of poor quality. I always say, what's the cost of poor quality, not just the cost of
Right.
quality. So is that kind of what we're talking about here? Is that when you talk about that tax, that cost of poor quality or cost of poor environmental or sustainability, whatever the flavor of ISO it might be, that's what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's at its core. That's the if you're using kind of the bimodal Pepsi, Coke, white or black, traditional versus competitive, which is most of the time we like our choices in a stack of two. Um, you typically see organizations either um, getting involved with this compliance thing because they have to. There's an initial requirement to do it, so you know see, I can't say over 50% are proactively going after third party certification. It's being passed down as requirements within the supply chain. So the catalyst is typically that you're required to do it. Maybe your sales force comes to you and says, "Hey, we'd really like to go into this new segment. We'd go into this new market, but when we do that, we might be required to have XYZ certification." So that becomes kind of almost, I've heard it called a hunting license. So in order to hunt in that particular set of woods in that forest, we need to have this license before we can even consider doing business there. But now you have 10 licenses that are required, especially again like in automotive, aerospace, medical device. So that's typically the catalyst for going down this road of compliance, unless it's a legal requirement, statutory regulatory requirements, and that's just the law for where you are or where you do business. But the competitive compliance, that's really when you are shifting to, and I like to use COPQ, cost of poor quality, better than cost of quality. Because I mean, why not say, well, cost of administrative or cost of 99% of the things that we do in an organization are not the value added steps, they're the ancillary stuff. So I personally prefer to use cost of poor quality. And one of the things that you can do in this competitive compliance lane is, first of all, know what your cost of poor quality is today, and then you're using a competitive compliance approach. And I'll give you some examples of how to do that here in a second. But you're using uh, the tools as a builder, as a process concierge, as a guide for the process owner and his or her team to drive down the cost of poor quality, drive up efficiencies, drive up ease of doing business, drive up morale, drive up safety, drive up positive environmental impacts, drive up controls that help to protect sensitive information. So that's kind of the two gears. One is I got to do it, and then the other is I'm using this as the disciplinary framework to drive a competitive advantage. If you didn't have check-ins, if you didn't have taxes that needed to be done at a certain date in the year, chances are you wouldn't want to do them because it takes a lot of discipline. It takes focus. It takes some rails and controls. So I'm not saying it's always easy, but what I am saying is that most of the organizations that are within kind of the group that's going to be watching this video, Mike, they've gotten through this traditional compliance piece, over here to the left, but then there's just been a plateau. And people are going, well, what about my job and AI and what does it mean? And well, I can tell you what, this is a good time to start shifting towards that right side, because you need to connect the things that you're doing to real enterprise value. And so that's what we mean by competitive compliance. And I'll give you some examples of how to shift from, let's say, a traditional auditor to kind of a more proactive soldier on behalf of the organization. Yes, you're ticking the box on compliance, but you're really working as an internal guide to drive process improvement or to drive other improvements to the business. So let's look at kind of this evolution arc, if you will. And one of the things that I go back to is the fundamentals of ISO 9004, which is the guidance document to 9001. I don't think a lot of people actually, even in the QMS world, spend much time on this document, on this table. It's in the back. It's A.1 or something like that. In the back of this document. But one of the things that it talks about is using a 5-level approach. So, for example, level 1 is the lowest in maturity, and level 5 would be the highest in maturity. So I took their table and just put some context to it by using the example of, let's say, supplier performance. So you're in purchasing, and your company does more and more in the land of, maybe like here in the US, more assembly rather than quote unquote manufacturing. You're outsourcing to suppliers, and then you're part of the final assembly. So you're really leaning heavily on your suppliers. Well, level 1 might be, your supplier performance is really bad, or you have a new supplier and you're not really sure if they're going to be good or not. So, you're way over here. Compliance and meeting minimum requirements is kind of like level 2. The suppliers are meeting minimum requirements for quality, delivery, and service. They're not delighting you, but it's okay. They're meeting minimum requirements. No big deal. Maybe they're not driving cost reductions. If they were, and they could pass that on to you. Now we're dealing with level 4. Suppliers are meeting and continually improving the performance and quality, service, and delivery. And then level 5 is all key suppliers are performing at world-class levels with at least 2 backup suppliers that are qualified. So if you lose one to a fire or tariffs change or whatever, you got a backup plan. This isn't set in stone. 9004 just says, hey, use this maturity level towards sustained success. And that's a different model than just coming back here and saying, well, do you comply or not? This is more about the degree in which you get to that ultimate state of perfection or the ultimate maturity. Where I see this really important is if you have, let's say, 50 locations around the world, and one of those locations can say, hey, we are a level 5 in terms of how we manage our suppliers. Great. You should isolate that level 5 as that benchmark in world class and best practice. Study that best practice, study that site that is at that level 5, and try to ratchet up the other sites, to moving towards this level. Now, maybe you have, again, quality, delivery, service, responsiveness is fine, but you want to work with your supply chain and making sure that, they're ethically sourcing their labor, or they're ethically sourcing or prioritizing climate change and reducing negative environmental impacts. So you can always kind of shift around within your own team. What do these classifications mean? How are they defined? But this gives you an arc, and you can see, over time, you'll see. Okay, we're going to move up to a level 3, and then it dips back down. Okay, we're all paying attention to this thing. Then you have the Hawthorne effect, where it's like, okay, now it's back to normal. So it takes people with the skills and with the interest and the keen eye of detail, like auditors, to really, make sure you don't go slipping back, and make sure there is sustainability and improvement even after a major campaign, like bringing in an advisory group or whatever it is. So that's what we're talking about in terms of maturity modeling and using that level 1 through 5.
And it really does speak to the difference between the kind of the base level of conformity and the higher, more strategic level you're talking about, because you could have an organization that, in terms of dealing with the suppliers, are at a level two or level three, maybe level two, that actually would tick the box. And an auditor would say, yeah, okay, conforms. It meets the bare minimum, move on to the next. But that's not really driving forward sustainable improvement, as you say, which is really the purpose any of us are doing this stuff for, is to achieve
Right.
sustainable improvement over the course of time, and continuing to do that as we go.
Yeah, you're driving down the road. Level three is, hey, I stopped off at Bucky's. I got the mug, the T-shirt, hit the restroom. Bucky's is great,
Good
but you
enough.
can't eat.
Yeah.
You can't eat at Bucky's.
Right.
You got the brisket sandwich. Like, okay, that's good, but it's time to move on down the road. We need to move to, what is this next level? And so auditors are really not all of them, but you're at least in a privileged position. And those that are in a privileged position plus know a little bit about business acumen, those aren't going to be replaced with AI. Those are the people that will rise to the top and say, okay, we're going to use this discipline that these standards require us to have, and we're going to use those as a framework to ratcheting up and moving on to the next level. Now, I've seen the other end of the scale where it's like, okay, you're down here, and then the boss comes in and there's some flavor of the month, and he or she's pounding on the table that we got to get to the top of the mountain. And change doesn't work like that. We need to figure out, where's the tipping point? Where are we getting we're at an F plus, but I'd love to tip over to a D minus. And those are areas where you're right on the edge. You could be at a D minus and slip off to F. So how can we ratchet up slowly with incremental success so we don't feel overwhelmed? And I guess that's the heart of this talk and this competitive compliance progression. It's using that same level of 1 through 5, but transitioning to a proactive compliance strategy versus just, again, checking the box. So Mike, let's kind of take a little journey here. If you are new to auditing or new to compliance, or if it's your first day in an auditor training class, you're kind of at newbie stage, and then you go through training, and then you go back to your normal job, and that kind of flattens out a bit. What you want to be able to do, and again, not everybody's going to do this, not everybody's going to go on this ride, but the idea here is, at a level 2, okay, you're starting to work to comply with just basic obligations, basic requirements in a standard. Maybe you start with documentation first. Maybe you start with taking the way that processes actually work, and they work well, and you're capturing that in a visual work instruction or standard work or a checklist or something like that. But then you ratchet up to this thing called, okay, you're a finder. You are, and Mike, most of your members and recurring community folks, they are certified finders. Their job is to say, yep, there you go. That's what's broken. See you later. Here are all the photos of the stuff that's broken. Bye-bye. Well, no wonder people want to knock you on the head when you're walking around with your clipboard, because yeah, that's a pretty, and auditing's hard. Don't get me wrong. I've been auditing for 31 years. It is hard, but um, if you have finders, but you don't have fixers, the opportunity or the volume in which you're improving is only going to be, the bottleneck is going to be the finder. You write 100 tickets for speeding, but there's never any repercussion, and you don't enforce that, or you don't use that to improve anything. You're just writing things to write things to write things. I have a client that I was doing some work with them, and they use this process that we use in automotive called layered process auditing. So the plant manager said, "Hey guys, if you sit at a desk, if you draw a salary and you're not in production, you have to do layered process audits." So, okay, that's fine. How often? Once a week. So you had 260 206 people that were going out and bothering production to go out and here's 10 questions, and every week you got to answer those questions. And I said, okay, wow, that's a lot of finders. How many fixers do you have? How many of those 266 are actually fixing stuff? And the answer was zero. Nobody. We have zero people fixing. All right. Well, so how many things actually got fixed? Okay, you have two things that were fixed from last week's audit. Great. You could throw away 264 of those audits because they don't mean anything. If you just point out what the problem is, but you don't finish the second half of this, which is converting that recognizance and the information that auditing gives you into action, that's only half of the yin yang, and so that happens a lot. Now, I can hear people already saying, yeah, but the standards say that you're not supposed to audit and go out and do root cause and all that. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, okay, in a reactive way, how can you look at holes in the process? How can you look at data and then isolate specific areas to where you can work with the process owner to point out where the deficiencies are coming from, and really be more along the lines of, okay, I'm going to have 133 people here and 133 people here on the fixer side, because a lot of times the bottleneck isn't hey, I have a lack of knowledge of what's wrong. A lot of times the problem's like, I'm just looking at my notebook. I have 7,000 tasks from the last, like, since the quality conference, Mike. Last 3 weeks I've just been like collecting tasks. Sometimes I just need help administratively, just doing and getting some of those things done. So if we can train kind of the people on the other half of the equation to be finders and be fixers, that's how you move up from a level 3 to a level 4. Now, this one is reactive. So I'm still in kind of a reactive mode. When you're at proactive, this is where you're really an architect or almost a process concierge, again, to use that. You're proactively helping process owners monitor changes, monitor things that are happening, within the business, outside of the business, that will, if we don't do something different, will have an impact. This right here is the top of the mountain. This is the best practice. This is what I want you to strive towards. You may never get there, but this is kind of where we come in and where we are different, because for so many years we've really worked in this space, but have been upset because people aren't moving up to this space. So now we've created the methodology and kind of the tool set, so we can help people with the how. How do they move up? How do auditors move to finders and fixers, or to leveraging competitive compliance as architects? So I'll tell you how. So this is an example of a SciPod or a super turtle or turtle diagram. And let me just pause this real quick. So this is an example of a one-page diagram where you have your external and internal suppliers here. You have kind of a reverse Ishikawa diagram. What are the inputs that this process needs in order to achieve the outputs? And who's the recipient of the output? So supplier input, process output, customer. Your SciPoc friend Mike would love this, but it's kind of a blending of a turtle diagram and a SciPoc. You could call it whatever you want. We even have the turtle diagram and the SciPoc smashed together called a Tupac diagram. But so how can you also leverage tools like this and AI? So let me show you. So this is an example of a template. It's in Google Sheets. We have a version in Excel. Pretty much everybody has access to that. But watch this. So you go into this, you're working with a process owner, and you ask AI to help you with a prompt. So we're giving the template, and the prompt is like, hey, I have a new IT process here. each time I add a new feature, how do I train people? And so the AI prompt, without you know going and spending a bunch of money in EQMS software or whatever, will fill this out. So think about this as a very quick, rough draft that you can use with the process owner. You're the facilitator, and it's going, all right, so these are the things that are kind of the key aspects of this process that you've never defined before. And now you can go in with the process owner, you save time, and you can fine tune this visual communication tool through the use of AI in a responsible way. I would say a AI concierge, or think of yourself as an AI wrangler. AI can quickly get away from you if you're not careful, but you're using this as a quick way to stand up a visual tool for the key aspects of a single process, and then working with that process owner to dial in the details. If you start with a blank slate, you know, people won't even know what you're talking about. But if you say, okay, some key outputs are the number of bugs found, or the percentage of legacy and uh, capability, and how are you going to measure that, so on and so forth. You have that here as a starting point, and then you can have people in a cross-functional team kind of argue over the final details. But that's a good way to quickly get everybody on the same page, and while leveraging AI. So what we've done is we've come up with 12 tools that are, by the way, they're free, Mike, but these are things where you could sit down if you're at that level 1 or 2 and you have nothing, or you have suppliers that maybe have no tools and no formal system, and they're probably never going to get certified. This is a good place for them to start. So go on to 12tools.com, Google 12 tools methodology, whatever, and you can start to see kind of these baseline tools that, irrespective of what standard you're auditing to or required to comply with, these are kind of the basic nuts and bolts starting points for the majority of the compliance obligations. And each of these have a AI element that can help you to rapidly kind of stand these up. So where do you go from here? 3 simple steps. First of all, assess your current stage. Where are you currently as an auditor, are on that 1 to 5 scale, or compliance person, a compliance professional, or certified, whatever it is you're certified to. Where are you now? What's the current stage? Step 2, identify one key process that you can improve. Have a discussion with the leadership team, or your supplier quality people can tell you what is the one most troublesome supplier, and what process seems to be where they're kind of stuck, and then shift from this finder to this finder fixer to this architect. And if you want to learn more about how to do that, you can scan the QR code, or you could go to acommoncenter.com and find out a ton of tools and other resources to help you in moving from where you are now towards that architect position. So that's all I got, Mike.
Jim, great job. Really appreciated that. Really good look at competitive compliance, what it means for all of us in terms of helping our organizations out. And process concierge, I like that. I think that's going to be my new favorite phrase. I like that. I'm going to use that. I'll give you credit for it though, so don't worry about
Okay.
that.
An AI wrangler. That was
AI
that was
Wrangler is
one,
a good one too.
because
That's right.
it could be like a wild stallion.
That's right. So good job, Jim. So those of you watching
Thanks,
this
Mike.
pre-recorded session, if you have questions and you'd like to address them to Jim, you can write us. There was a QR code that Jim included there. You can reach out to them that way. Or you can write us at info@exemplarglobal.org. We'll get your questions over to Jim. We've also set up a community, special community in our broader Exemplar Global community, where we're going to be discussing all the Expo topics here at this year's Expo. So check that out and comment. If you have questions for Jim, Jim will be in there, I'm sure, to answer them for you. So that's a good way of reaching Jim as well. Before we
And Mike,
close,
I have to
oh,
brag. Hey, I have a new accolade thanks to your community manager. I've
you
been
do.
anointed with a community exemplar community ambassador. So
Ambassador,
that's really cool.
you are.
And yeah, I enjoy what you guys have put together and it really connecting with other professionals. So well done on that community. And yeah, I'll be in there if anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, appreciate that. So yeah, as I said, before we get rid of the session, before we close it out, if you do want to prove your commitment to continuous improvement in your own professional development, we do offer CPD for the session. So check that out. We offer CPD for all the sessions here at the Expo. So thanks again for joining us, Jim. Good job as always. And we'll see you at the next session here at Exemplar Global's Online Expo. So long.
Thanks, Mike.